Hi, Rebecca Jarrett-Dalton from Two Red Shoes Mortgage Brokers, and I hope you'll indulge me. I'd like to have a little conversation with our first-home buyers at the moment. Now, where this comes from is, not that long ago, I was having a conversation on the sideline of a footy match with, a young guy, really together. He's got a young family. He wants to better himself. He wants to go forward. He's asking me about savings and what can he do, and how can he build equity, or how can he get in the property market? Because he wants to do something solid with his life, right? And he said to me something that stuck with me. He said two things. He said, one, why would I want to pay $6,000 a month for a mortgage when I can pay rent for $3,000 a month? Okay, kind of makes some sense. And the second thing is, I don't even know where I want to live now. That's fair. So the second point I'll let slide, but the first one, it stuck with me. It really stuck with me. And I thought about it and I thought about it, and I really wanted to prepare a solid response that can explain to you why you would take that extra step and why you would commit to something that sounds, like a lot of pain. We have to think about what that longer term gain is. In order to do this, I'm actually going to tell my own story, so please indulge me. And I am referring to some notes down here because I've got some precise figures that I want to discuss and get correct. Okay. So in 1995, my now ex-husband and I bought our first home, and we had a mortgage of about $120,000, which had repayments, we're talking the high 90s here, had repayments of about $1,300 a month. At that time, we were renting, or prior to buying, we were renting, and that rent was about $200 a week. So we're talking about $860 a month for rent relative to $1,300 a month for a mortgage. Now, it's not double, but it hurt. I can tell you, I can clearly remember the stress and the anxiety. I can clearly remember eating toast, eating mints, like a big night out was a $6 blockbuster movie. Like, I do remember exactly how that felt. Now, what's interesting about that, because that's 30 years ago, it's really tough to relate to that. But what's interesting about that is that we used that property to buy other homes and be able to upgrade our home eventually, which we would never have been able to do if we hadn't first bought that house and started to build our equity. But the second thing is we actually sold it. So we sold it in 2010, which is not that long ago, really. I mean, we're still talking 13 years ago, but it's pretty relative. And what is interesting is, at that time, we were tossing up whether we kept it or not. So I've got real figures here that we can relate to. Now, we sold that, and let's say that those purchasers borrow the lot, or near to, they would have a mortgage now of around about $2,400 a month. And at that time, I had rent appraisals done. So the rent was about $420 a week, which is a bit over $1,800 a month. So again, it's not quite that double, but it was worth it for them to get in, and it was worth it for us to not have to pay that high mortgage figure. Now, I can verify that from my files, which is pretty lucky, but here is the really cool bit. Not long ago, in 2023, that property was actually renovated by the purchasers, the people who've owned it now for 10 years, and put on the market as a rental property. Here's the thing, it's renting now for $750 a week. So now, let's have a look at it. Let's assume they've done nothing, but they probably have paid a chunk of their mortgage off. If they've done nothing, their repayments will be about that $2,400 a month, because interestingly, interest rates were the same then as they are now. That's kind of novel for me to realize. So the repayments are about $2,400 a month. The rent, $750 a week, is about $3,500, just a bit under $3,500 a month, $3,250, right? So again, we're not talking double, but how interesting. If we still owned that property, we would have no mortgage at all. And yet if we were living in that property as a rental, our rent would have gone up and up and up to the point where it was now costing us $3,250 a month. So leaving aside the change in value in homes, the mortgage repayment stayed relatively kind of cool, relatively the same, and at the same time the rents have gone up considerably. So that's the reason right there that you might think about spending $6K a month when you could be renting for $3,000. Now, I think $6 is probably a lot as well. That's a different kind of property. A $6,000 a month mortgage is not the same home that they're renting for 3, which is kind of nice, right? You've got this option to upgrade. Again, you don't have the option to upgrade without paying more money unless you've got that equity. I spoke to you, I said, we use the sale of that property to get us into another home, an upgraded home. Then you don't get that opportunity if you're paying rent. The only way you can do that is kind of change the suburb that you're in or pay more rent. So it's a long-term game. Basically, this is the thing. It's what we call a long game. You're not going in there for today's results, and you're going to feel some stress today, but down the track, it'll feel a lot more comfortable, and you will not look back with regret. I'm quite sure of that. And don't forget, like I say, that was actually the launch pad into a whole other kind of property direction. So an opportunity you also can't have if you're renting. Hope this makes sense. I hope that there's something in there that triggers that for you there might be an opportunity. And it's not always about buying your first home either. There might be, your first rental property or something that gets you into the market and you start playing that long game.
And the other question is, are you still paying off a student debt? How much is hanging over your head? 133693. I have a friend who was moving lenders the other day from one bank to another, and the bank that this person was moving to insisted that the HECS debt be paid off before they would offer a loan, because there is something about to happen to HECS debts next month. Australian university students and graduates are bracing for an increase to their HECS and HELP debts. On June the 1st, $74 billion worth of HECS and HELP debt will go up by 7%. Joining me now to explain what impact that will have on the student loans, Brett Sutton. Not that one. This one is a credit advisor with Two Shoes Mortgage Brokers, or Two Red Shoes, I beg your pardon. Brett, good afternoon.
Hello, Julie. Thanks for having me on the program.
Thank you. We'll get to your name in just a moment. But can you explain what is the change that is happening here for anyone who's got a HECS debt who perhaps doesn't know about this? What's going to happen?
Yeah, sure. So the HECS and the HELP debts that university graduates have accumulated typically increase with CPI. Now, between 2010 and 2020, the CPI hasn't been more than 3%, so it's increased marginally for most people. What's happened last year with inflation, it went up 3.9%, and this year we're expecting something in the vicinity of an increase of 7.1%, which is a big jump, and I think that's the shock to many graduates.
So inflation is high. If people can afford to pay off those student loans now, does it make sense for them to do that, or would you advise just leaving it there and paying it off at the usual rate?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the individual circumstances. While 7.1 is much more than it had been, if you had to borrow that money from other sources, be it credit card or personal loan debts, you would be paying a much higher interest rate. And I would suggest some of those other consumer debts, if you did have some spare cash, is probably what you would be wanting to put it towards. But if you're in a situation where you have a little bit of spare money that you can put towards this debt between now and the 1st of July, I definitely think it could be worthwhile, and you'll insulate yourself a little more from that big jump.
How high, Brett, can these HECS and HELP debts get? And in the case of my friend, it was around about $15,000. Can some people accumulate much more than that?
Yeah, I think in my practice as a mortgage broker, I've seen some clients with HELP and HECS debts in the vicinities of the 60, 70,000s.
And so what hope do they have of paying that back and trying to afford to buy a house or something at one stage?
And this is where it becomes tricky, is in the last 18 months, 2 years, APRA, who regulates the lenders, has insisted that lenders stick to around a 6 times debt-to-income ratio. So some of these debts have now are now included in your borrowing capacity. So let's say you have a HECS debt of 50,000, you have an income of 100,000, potentially a lender could lend you 600. But they will only lend you, if you have no other debts other than the HELP or HECS debt, they'll only lend you $550 because you've got that $50,000 sitting there.
And your advice then for anyone who has one of these debts?
Yeah, if you're looking to purchase a property, look, it's about those future opportunities. If this HELP or HECS debt could limit those, so if you're able to, if you do have a little bit of spare cash flow, might be worth just parking it or putting it towards that to try and reduce it over time.
Good advice, thank you. And now, your name, Brett Sutton. How's that working out for you?
I regularly get incorrectly tagged on things on social media. I get the blame for lockdowns and all sorts of things. There's a little bit of confusion there, but there's also a segment of the community that's a fan.
I was going to say he had a bit of a fan club. And at what stage of the pandemic journey did you realise that it was an issue?
It was probably when Victoria were probably, really starting to crank up the lockdowns and, probably enforcing them a little bit more harshly than other parts of the country. That started to cop a bit of heat online, yeah.
And do you bear any resemblance to the famous Brett Sutton?
Look, I don't think so, no. Unfortunately, because as we said, I think there's some people out there that, is popular for that particular reason, but unfortunately, not so much.
Don't get the two confused. One gives financial advice, one gives
That's right.
medical advice. Brett, good to talk to you. Thank you. Brett Sutton there, not that one. He's accredited advisor with 2 Red Shoes, their mortgage brokers.